Thank you, Stacy. He forgot to introduce me last service, so this is an upgrade for sure. Good morning, guys. If I haven't gotten the chance to meet you before, my name's Fabian. I've been coming to 614 for like 6 or 7 years, a pretty long time. I still remember like the first couple of times I came. The sanctuary was a lot different than it looks now. There were basketball hoops up. The worship was just acoustic guitar, piano, and a little box drum. But it was so raw. It was awesome. And I remember 614 within those four walls in elementary school. That was the first time I had an encounter with Jesus. And it was like I was a point in my life where I could finally say, yeah, Jesus is real. I can't deny this. And I wish I could say that from that day on that like I was on fire for God. I was going door to door, preaching the gospel and living out this mission. But that is not the truth. My walk was definitely up and down for a while. I think it really came from just the fact that I didn't truly believe that Jesus could fulfill all my needs, all my desires. So I looked to the world for fulfillment. I looked to the world for answers. And it became super easy to just feel like I was living this double life. I would come in on Sunday, hands raised, praising God, and then I would go the rest of the week and I wouldn't even think about him until the following Sunday. This went on for years until eventually I think my life it came to a standstill. The world and the things that I had pursued, they came up short. I was unsatisfied. And like I said before, like in the back of my head, I think I always knew that God was real, and I always knew that Jesus was the answer to all my problems, that life with him was truly what I was designed for. So, I was just like, all right, I gotta get serious about this. I gotta stop all the nonsense and let's do this. I decided to start living with some guys who were following Jesus. I made the decision to just open the daily for myself, just to see what it was. Eventually I got plugged in a life group, and I just wanted to see where God would take me if I truly followed him. Now, standing here today, this was without a doubt the best decision that I've ever made in my life. It's unbelievable to look back at just what this community and all these things, like the growth that they fostered in me. Scripture gives us the promise that if we seek the Lord, that we will find him. And Jesus really kept that promise for me. It definitely didn't happen overnight, but as I started spending time in the Word and in prayer, God slowly kindled this fire in me that I can't explain. Like to this day, I got excited to like read. I got excited to pray. I got excited to just sit in his presence. I got excited to listen to worship. And it's something that I continue to just think about today. Like I don't really understand it. I think I always heard of this intimate relationship growing up that we can have with the Lord. And it was hard for me to imagine. But as I sought out the Lord and his voice, his presence, his spirit, I would just ask the Lord to give me all that he had to offer. And I feel like he really did give it, and he continues to pour that out on me today. My words can't really put it to justice, but the Holy Spirit has actually become someone who is so near and real to me. It sounds like almost funny to say out loud, but he's like a friend. He's like a close friend. Not only have I gotten the opportunity to witness his friendship, but also just his raw power and his gifts. I mean, people would pray for me and know things that they would have no way of knowing. I've seen my friends getting set free from the clutches of the enemy in ways that I would have never imagined. And more than anything, I've gotten to see the Lord transform me and the people around me to live in his joy and his love, like truly from death to life. Guys, if I can give you any encouragement at all, I would say if anyone here feels like they're dipping their toe and following Jesus, just take the dive and really leap in. Jesus dying for our sins and granting us salvation is the greatest act of love that there ever was or there ever will be. But it would be a shame if as Christians we leave it at just that. We serve a God who resurrected from the dead and is very much alive today. We can enter a relationship with a living God. I like the saying, Jesus doesn't just save us from something, he saves us to something. So Jesus promises to give life, and he promises to give life to the full. And following him is better than anything I could have ever imagined, so I encourage you guys to really leap in. Thanks for listening. That's all I got. But
Thank you. Appreciate it, man. Yes, and It really is cool to see, because I remember back in the, not Centennial, where were we before? Gables Elementary, like those days, and like seeing this kid, Fabian, like, you guys see the kids running around at kids worship and all that, like, they grow up and they listen to like what we're doing here, like at kids ministry, and just through the things that we do at church, and then eventually they're like leading worship and like sharing their testimony and like having their lives change. It's really fantastic to see. It's just wild and just such a testament to what God can do in a life. Like why it's important to put these types of rhythms, like foundational things in your life. Your parents do it, and then you see what happens to their kids as a result. So fantastic. Let me invite out Andrew. Got one more testimony before we get to the preaching. Yeah, give him a hand. Let's go. Come on.
All right. Good morning. Last service, they told me to hold the mic a lot closer to my mouth, so I'm going to try and work on that this service. But my name is Andrew, if we haven't met. I've been coming to 614 for almost a year now. And I'm kind of the type of guy that I feel like I know a lot of people, but I never really set my feet or like planted roots anywhere. Never really had a core group of people that I was hanging out with a lot. So when you come to college, especially a school like Ohio State with 50, 60,000 people, sometimes it can be pretty lonely, if I'm being completely honest. But one day I got invited to 614 this January, and so I went, and it was awesome. I mean, there's no other words to describe. I felt like I had found something that was missing for a while, something that I'd been looking for. And I really wanted to see and explore what life with Jesus really looked like. But in the back, let me rephrase it, not even in the back of my mind, in the forefront of my mind, there was still a skepticism about the reality of a really big and powerful God that wanted to speak to me, just one out of 7 billion, on the planet. I was fighting with that idea, but I really wanted to jump in, so I got into a life group, and I remember we were meeting this one night in March, and I'd been asking some questions about salvation, like, why should I be saved instead of other people? Like, why do I get to be saved when I haven't done anything good? Honestly, at that point, I felt like I'd done a lot more bad than good, to be honest. But, like, why me, right? And I remember after that, Danny asked me a question, and he said, honestly, right now, if you died tomorrow, do you think you would go to heaven? And I sat there for a minute and thought about it and came to the conclusion that I didn't really know. And usually at the end of our life group, we like to pray for somebody, and usually we don't ask any questions so that they don't know anything, and they just let the Holy Spirit move. But this time they kind of had a good idea, and so we decided to pray for me. And so we were sitting there and just closed my eyes, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. By the end of it, I thought it'd been like 5 to 10 minutes, and it was actually about an hour long, which was awesome. But during that prayer, I remember sitting there, and I got this really clear, elaborate picture in my mind, like nothing I'd ever experienced before, which was crazy to me, because I was still fighting with the fact that that could happen to me with God, And that was crazy in itself, but what made it more amazing, really, was that Aaron spoke up, and he started saying, he's like, hey, I feel like I have this picture for you. And he starts describing it, and I start listening, and I'm listening, and little did I know he was describing the exact picture that was in my mind, every detail, like without fail, like he didn't miss, straight up. And I remember at that time that was the craziest thing I've ever experienced, most powerful moment, I think, in my life. And I wrote it down a week later, so I could remember. I meant to bring that paper, but I kind of fumbled the bag a little bit and forgot to bring it. But good thing is I have a PDF document on my phone. So I just wanted to share with you guys the last line of what I wrote. It's dated March 21st. And the last thing I wrote on that paper was, I knew in this moment that God was real. And after that moment, that same night, I decided to fully accept Jesus, fully pursue him, and move on with my life with Jesus. And I mean, I couldn't even describe the change that's gone in my heart, in my everything really, since that day. And I feel like I'm a completely different person. And I was thinking about just while we were worshiping first service on that last song, and I feel like I'd finally found the answer that night to my questions. I was asking, why me, right? Why should I be saved? And the answer wasn't anything that I've done. But the answer was, what could wash it all away was the blood of Jesus. And that's really all I got. I wish I had more words, but that's it, really. That's it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I mean, that's why we do all that we do. That's why we do the Sunday thing, why we do the life group thing, why we do the serving stuff. It's ultimately so people come to a real experiential knowledge of the person of Jesus, because we believe that he's the one that our lives were made for, right? So thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Fabian. I'm going to ask you all to stand to your feet, and I want you to welcome up Aaron Stevens. Give him a hand. Yeah, come on. Aaron's an elder here, and I've known Aaron for a while. I have the privilege of calling him a friend for a while now, and it's cool to see how much he cares for this church, how much he loves this church, and how much he is bought into what God is doing in this church, 614. So I trust that this morning God is going to speak through him. He already did in the first service, so I know he did, but for all of us sitting here this morning, I truly and honestly believe that God is going to speak to you about some particular in your life, and you will have the opportunity to respond in faith to whatever that is this morning. So give him another hand.
Yeah, please sit down. So, I got to get a plug for Fabian and Andrew. I got to hang out with these guys. We're still hanging out with these guys every week for last 9 months. And, well, sadly enough, I'm old enough to be their dad. Kind of sucks, but I look up to those two guys. I mean, those guys' passion and love for the Lord is just so encouraging to me, and I know I've become a better person. I know I've become a better follower of Jesus because of them. They're the coolest guys I know, too. If I say any cool lingo, it's because of them. Now, the reality is I'm usually about a month behind, because once I finally figure out what it means, they've moved on, but I try my best to, keep up. So who here knows wait, let me back up. David is not here. Pastor David is our normal pastor. I'm stepping in for him. We're in the middle of a series on the life of Elisha. It's called Audacious Faith. Elisha was an amazing prophet in the Old Testament. God used him in absolutely incredible ways. And we're kind of fast-forwarding a little bit. David, out of his graciousness, because I don't do this on the reg, let me pick a story... Let me pick a story out of Elisha. And so we're fast forwarding to the last moments of Elisha's life. We actually will talk about his last words. So when David gets back next week, he'll step in and pick up where he left off. So who here knows we're in a battle? Really not terribly many of us. So we're in a battle, in case y'all didn't know. In Ephesians 6, it tells us that our enemy isn't flesh and blood, but it's the principalities and powers of evil. And if you're curious of what we're fighting for, John 10:10 says it best. The thief comes to lie, kill, and destroy. Jesus says, I have come life for the full. Those two worlds could not be any different. They're certainly opposing forces. And too often, I think we don't fight back. I think too often We watch it happen. We accept our circumstances. And really, if we don't fight back, it's not really a battle, right? If we don't fight back, it's just more of like oppression. And as followers of Jesus, we know how the story ends, right? We know who wins the war. We know Jesus wins the war. But we're in a fallen world, and unfortunately, while the war's won, these battles continue to rage on. So this morning, I just want to hopefully leave you with some practical application on how to battle in the spiritual world. And why it is so important for us to grab hold of this truth. So if you could open your Bibles to 2 Kings, we're going to do chapter 13, and we're going to go 14 through 19. So when Elisha was in his last illness, King Jehoash, also known as King Joash, of Israel, visited him and wept over him. My father, I see the chariots and charioteers of Israel, he cried. Elisha told him, get a bow and some arrows, and the king did as he was told. Elisha told him, put your hand on the bow, and Elisha laid his hands on the king's hands. Then he commanded, open that eastern window, and he opened it. Then he said, shoot. So he shot an arrow. Elisha proclaimed, this is the Lord's arrow, an arrow of victory over Aram, which is present-day Syria, for you will completely conquer the Arameans, which is a people group from Aram, at Aphek, which is where the throwdown is going to happen. Then he said, now pick up the other arrows and strike them against the ground. So the king picked them up, struck the ground 3 times. But the man of God was angry with him. You should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times, he exclaimed. Then you would have beaten Aram until it was entirely destroyed. Now you will only be victorious 3 times. Wow. So, King Joash, I'm sure you guys are wondering, like, who is this character, right? So, his long line of kings, his grandfather was a king, his father was a king, and earlier in 2 Kings, it says that they did wrong in the sight of God. So I don't know exactly what they did, but it probably wasn't good. He was a person that outwardly worshiped God, put on a good show, and inwardly he did not. You know, Jesus called the Pharisees a whitewashed tomb, which means they looked good on the outside, but they were dead on the inside. Like who he said he was, he really wasn't. In fact, he even supported the idea of cult worship in Israel. Now, the main reason he did this is because it was for political reasons, which is, a whole nother reason, and I'm sure you guys don't understand politics and why people do what they do these days, but that's his story. So he comes to Elisha, and he says, my father, I see the chariots and charioteers of Israel. Wept over him. So he visits him. He's obviously upset. He says, my father. He honors him because he has seen all the miracles that Elisha has performed through the power of God. And then he sees the chariots and charioteers of Israel, which means he's looking at his army and he realizes it's not enough. You see, for generations, Israel has been attacked and they've battled with the Syrians. And it's gone from a fraction of its power. One source said he had 8 chariots. Doesn't sound like a lot. I don't own any, so 8 seems like a lot. But, if you're in a battle, 8's not terribly many. So in this moment, Joash realizes that his protection has come from Elisha. Now, I didn't go into this in the last service, but I really feel like I need to say this. If Joash had to give advice to his kids, he would say, appreciate what you have before it becomes what you had. The people we rely on the most are the people we take the most for granted. And I'm assuming a lot of the relationships in here, those are those people. So I want you to look to the left, say, I value and I appreciate you. Look to the right, I value and I appreciate you. I value and appreciate you. So then Elisha goes on to say, get a bow and some arrows. And the king did what he was told. Elisha told him, put your hand on the bow, and Elisha laid his hands on his king's hands. So at this point, I got to imagine Joash is probably he's desperate. I'm assuming he would do about anything at this point. He's afraid. His kingdom is in jeopardy. The true protector Elisha is gone. And I love the symbol that Elisha tells him to do. He says, put your hand on the bow, and laid his hands on the king's hands. The symbol of that, I just love. He's saying, you're not gonna have to fear anything because God's hands are upon you. It's not going to be in your might. It's not going to be in your strength. It's going to be in God's strength. I mean, he already knows, right? He has no army. And now he gets to go in confidence knowing that God's hands are upon his hands. And it's interesting because, hang on here. Oh, my screen just went off. Hang on. I'm sorry. Okay. So then he commanded, open that eastern window, and he opened it. Then he said, shoot. So he shot the arrow. Elisha proclaimed, this is the Lord's arrow, an arrow of victory over Aram, for you will completely conquer the Arameans at Aphek. So you have the Syrians, they're knocking on his door, and Elisha tells him, open the eastern window, shoot an arrow, and then you will experience freedom. You will experience freedom because of the Lord's arrow. And it's interesting because Joash is scared of the Syrians, right? And what does God have him do? He has him shoot an arrow to that which he's afraid of. I don't know, that's interesting. Like when I'm scared of something, the last thing I want to do is go after it, honestly. And back then, when you shot an arrow at an enemy or another city, you were basically issuing a challenge. It was an act of aggression. It was an act of hostility. So Joash was throwing some shade at Aram, right? Maybe he was doing some ancient times trolling. Anyone? So Joash fears something, and he goes after it, right? He goes after it because he knows God's hands are upon him. And when I stepped back, I'm like, all right, what does this have for me and us? And I realized that God is asking Joash to move in the opposite spirit. Like he has fear, and he says, go to faith. And so when we feel unloved, when we feel sad, scared, God is asking us to move in the opposite spirit. So if you're sad, grab the arrow and shoot the arrow of joy. When you feel unloved, grab the arrow and shoot the arrow of love. Sometimes exactly what we need is exactly what we need to give. And the other interesting thing is the freedom didn't come until after he shot it, right? Any type of battle, we have to act first, then the freedom will come. Freedom will always precede the fear, or fear will always precede the freedom. I know in my life, in my kind of darkest times, I've seen this play out over and over again. I feel like I have nothing to offer. I feel like I'm depressed, I'm in despair, and I've just felt this warrior mentality, I guess, rise up and then just go love someone, give someone hope. And honestly, it is amazing how it works. Now, at the same time, I know there's people out there, and that's how I am. I'm a people pleaser, and I feel like I got to take care of everybody. That does not stop us from having to fill ourselves with time in the Lord, right? We have to fill ourselves with time in the Lord before we can give. But when we face a battle, go after it, right? Shoot the arrows. Because God's hand is upon us. So now Joash is thinking, okay, I got my victory. It's such a relief, I got it in before, Elisha died. That's great. I'm ready to move on. I'm going to go back to my kingdom and, eat my grapes or, whatever. And Elisha's not done with him yet. So Elisha says, now pick up the other arrows and strike them against the ground. So the king picked them up and struck the ground 3 times. But the man of God was angry with him. You should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times, he exclaimed. Then you would have beaten Aram until it was entirely destroyed. Now you will be victorious only 3 times. You know, Elisha and Joash have had a great relationship for the most part, and these are the last words Joash is going to hear from Elisha. I don't know about you, but that is not what I wanted to hear when a friend, mentor, whatever, passes on. So when I was thinking about this picture, this is how I saw it in my head. You know, Elisha's on his last few breaths. His eyes are closed. You know, he's exhausted. He may be breathing heavily. And he knows the tendencies of Joash. You know, he's seen it play out in Elisha's life. And I can just hear him, after he says, strike the arrows, he's saying, come on, don't stop. Don't stop. So Elisha's eyes are closed, and this is what he hears this. Oh, man. Black Friday impulse buy. I'm sure I'm the only one that does that, but wrong way. This is a fail. So his eyes are closed, and he's like, strike the arrows. Strike all the remaining arrows. So he hears 1. Laugh all you want. It's not as easy as it looks. He hears 2. He's like, come on, Joash, just keep striking. Keep striking. Then he hears this. And then nothing. You know, I can just see him with this exhale of, oh, come on. I told you to strike all the arrows. Why didn't you strike all the arrows? And then in his anger, he says, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Then you would have had complete freedom over Aram. But now, only 3 wins. Instead of freedom, you know, he goes from a conquering king to a cowering king. You know, he settles for the freedom that he thought he needed and wanted. But God had a whole nother plan for him. But he quit too soon. He gave up. And you know, we never really know why he stopped. Like what happened between arrow 3 and arrow 4. But it kind of reminds me of Fabian's story where he's like, I just quit that nonsense. You know, I can see Fabian getting to arrow 2, arrow 3, and he pauses, and then he's like, oh, screw it, I'm going to finish. And he finished. And those guys I'm telling you, after Andrew accepted, that guy, I mean, he physically looks different. I mean, the guy is and you know, I see these guys every week, and I swear every time they come, they're different. I mean, God has got their hearts. You know, he has got their hearts, and gosh, love those guys. And we never really know the responsibility that is upon us. Right? Joash had no idea that if he would have stopped, what would have happened. Right? It's not just his freedom, but it's the entire kingdom. The entire kingdom of Israel suffered from his lack of faith. And I was thinking about this in my mind. I mean, if you look over there, in the Middle East, they're still fighting. You know, I'm like, if he would have shot those extra arrows, what would it look like now? I mean, I don't know. But there's something in that. And I believe I know why he stopped. Can't say for sure, but this is my opinion. He shows up to Elisha, and he's just desperate. He's scared, and he's desperate. Elisha gives him a word. He does it. He knows he's got the arrow of victory. He gets what he wants. He becomes complacent. It happened in a matter of seconds, you know? Just a few arrows, and he becomes complacent. And it was easy for me to say, you know, what a moron. Why didn't he shoot all the arrows? And I ask myself, like, what am I desperate for? And if God blesses me with it, what am I going to do? Am I going to keep striking arrows, or am I just going to sit there and stop striking? I didn't like the answer, to be totally honest with you all. There's a difference between having hope for something and having hope in something. If we have our hope in anything other than God, we're going to face oppression. It's just not how it works. Our hope needs to be in God. We can have hope that God will provide that, but our hope cannot be in that thing. You know, it's in that moment that we worship the gift as opposed to the giver. He settled for a freedom he thought he needed instead of the freedom God had for him. He was so short-sighted. He didn't finish the task. He didn't see it through. He thought his decision was a better decision than what God's decision was. I mean, he quit too soon. You know, there's a verse in Romans 14:12 that says, "So then each of us will give an account of ourselves to God." And I can't help but just, I've been thinking about that as I've been doing, preparing for this. And I've just felt so convicted. You know, I know when I'm giving my account to God, I want to see him, and I want to say, I struck, kicked, struck, and struck, and my quiver is empty. I want to look God in the eye and say, I left it all on the table. My quiver is empty. You know, the series is called Audacious Faith. And I feel like too often we think these huge steps of faith are the things that have these huge ripples across the world and around us. But the reality is like audacious faith is about having faith in the small steps that lead to these huge ripple effects across the world, right? And it was in a moment when Joash made that decision to not strike. And the interesting thing about a moment is that they happen so fast, it's so easy to ignore them. But the reality is a moment can change everything. Look at that moment he made and look at the impact that he had. I mean, our life at the end of the day is just made up of a lot of different moments. You know, we have so many of them, we're like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Oh, it's not that big of a deal. Oh, I'll read my Bible some other time. But there's impact to that. And we just don't know what it is. I mean, the only reason that Joash knew what the impact was is because Elisha told him. Now, what if you had, you know, like Elisha, some old guy following you around telling you, well, you didn't take advantage of that. This is what's going to happen. You know, Joash just needed to shoot 2 more arrows. I mean, how easy is that? Just 2 more arrows. So let me ask you a question. What's left in your quiver? You know, Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, you know, he had more arrows than anybody. And he walked away with an empty quiver. He laid it all on the line. He gave it up. He faced more adversity than any of us could ever imagine. And he went to the cross for you and you and you and you and you and you and you. And he'd do it over and over and over and over again. So I'm sure you're asking, well, what's it look like to have nothing in the quiver, right? What does it practically look like? And I seem to find these random things in my journal, and I found this in my journal, and it just hit spot on. And it's low-key fire, too, by the way. I did not write this, just to be clear. Where are the men and women of this generation who hold their lives so cheap and be faithful unto death? Where are those who will lose their lives for Christ's sake, finding them a way for the love of him? Where are those who live dangerously and be reckless in his service? Where are the lovers who love him and the souls of men more than their reputations or comfort of very life? Where are the men and women who say no to self, who take up Christ's cross to bear it after him, who are willing to nail it in college, home, office, or the mission field, who are willing, if need be, to bleed, suffer, and to die on it? My favorite one, where are the adventurers, the explorers, the buccaneers for God who count one soul greater than the fall or rise of an empire? Where are the men and women who are willing to pay the price of vision? Where are the men and women of prayer? Where are God's men and women in this day of God's power? That's what it looks like to live with an empty quiver. So let me just ask you a question, like, what's holding you back? Like, what are you holding on to? Like, in your quiver, what are you holding? Are you holding on comfort, pride, complacency? Like, what is holding you back? You know, I go back to that comment about moments, and I think so many of us come here to receive, right? That's part of church. But what if we came to give? Like, what if we came to give what's in the quiver instead of putting more stuff in it? I also think about Andrew's testimony where he says, I didn't know if I was going to heaven, you know? And I'm sure there's people here who think that same thing. And there's power in a moment. And in this moment, you have a chance. You have the chance to, like, take a step. You have a chance to know with its certainty that you're going to heaven. I just want to encourage you to not let this moment pass by. Then there's some of you who feel like you're just like boxed in. You know, oh yeah, great, I hear about like moving in the opposite spirit. When I feel unloved, I'm to love, but you just don't have the energy. You just can't make it happen. I mean, I would ask you to take a step forward. And then there's others that just know they're carrying this huge quiver, this huge weight that they just can't get rid of. I know going through this, I got some stuff in my quiver. And it's been hard to drop. And the only way we drop it is by the power of God. And He is in this place. He is in this place, and right now you can be like free of it. You can be so free of it. And I know generally at the end of the service, we have the prayer ministry team come up, and I just got this picture of like, instead of people coming up to someone for prayer, I want to invite people just to come up and pray with God. I want you to come to God. Like, you don't need someone to pray with you. You can go directly to God. So this morning, this is your chance. This is your chance to seriously take a moment and get right with God. This is a chance to walk out that door different than when you walked in. This is your chance to give what you're holding on to and experience complete freedom. Like, we don't get freedom by receiving, we get freedom by giving. We get freedom by giving it to God. And I got 2 specific words for whoever. I feel like there's people here who feel like they're in this box. And the tops and the sides just keep coming in. They keep coming closer and closer and closer. And you started with your arms out and you just can't hold it anymore. Some of you in that box just can't get out of your own way sometimes. You just overanalyze everything. You're like, oh, I don't want to mess up. Like, I want to be in God's will. I don't want to mess up. I don't get doing God's will. And you start to like panic about it. But the thing about Joash, he lost all of his freedom, not because of what he did, but what he didn't do. And the second one is, some of us just carry this weight, this pain from our past, sadness, depression, whatever it is, and it's been with us for so long, we just can't let go. It gets to a point where it's so much a part of us, we don't want to let go. And I want to encourage you, do not let the comfort and familiarity of your pain stop you from experiencing Jesus. Don't let the familiarity of your pain make you think that the unknown path to freedom and restoration. God is a good God. He's a good God. And he wants you free. He wants everyone free. It's his will for us. So I would just invite you to stand. We're going to roll into worship right now. And if you're someone that isn't sure you're going to go to heaven and you'd like to take that step, please find me. I'm happy to pray for you. And just realize the altar is open. And please just take a step and see what God can do.